Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. We are here today with George Bardissi, who is the CEO, the president, the man at bvoip.
Thank you. That was a great. I love that intro, Mr. Radio over here. Appreciate chatting with you again, Scott. It's always fun times.
Yeah.
I hear you had some car troubles recently.
Yeah, well, hopefully my car troubles will be over tomorrow. About 2 weeks ago, I wrecked my car. Wasn't my fault, and I'm supposed to be getting another one tomorrow. I'm taking delivery of, well, it's just, it's not a brand new car. Like I told the insurance company of the guy that hit me, I just want to be made whole again, put me back to where I was. So I had a 2020 Tesla Model 3, and I'm getting back into a 2020 Model 3 Tesla with about 35,000 less miles. So I'll take it.
That's a win. I'll take it. You're Mr. Tesla. You must love it if you're getting another one.
Man, I'm going to tell you, George, that car saved my life. I hit a cement pillar on the side of the highway at like 70 miles an hour and got hit from the rear and hit in the front. So, and I walked away without a scratch. So
Wow.
I would, and not to mention the gas savings. There's no gas, of course. So my electric bill, I leave it charged up all the time at home in my garage. And my electric bill only went up. I've had it 2 years, and my electric bill on average went up $50 a month. That's it.
That's cool.
Less than a tank of gas.
Sounds like you don't drive far, though.
Well, I don't know. In 2 years, I put 45,000 miles on the car.
Okay, but what's your what you're not, are you driving 2-3 hours, or is it just
not every day?
Yeah.
I mean, but I don't travel a whole lot. So if I do stuff, it's going to be local around town.
Gotcha. So it just adds up.
Yeah, it just adds up.
Cool. So yeah, I mean, I got some people that are Tesla people around me, and then I got people who are like, I don't know about the electric thing. I'm kind of in the I don't know about the electric thing. I mean, I've now, because of traveling around and renting cars.
Sure.
That's the car that they had available. So that's what you take. And it would be nice to know some things before you. Now they finally send an email out when you rent them, right? They're like, here's some things you should know about this electric car. Before it was like, just jump in the car and you're like, how do I lock this door and make sure that the car is not just open? But okay. Because when you get the Tesla on the rental, they just give you the key card and you're like, I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
But anyway,
so you rented a Tesla on a recent trip.
I've had a couple of Tesla rentals. And then I also, on the most recent trip down in Orlando, rented the Polestar, which I think is what's the name of the company? It'll come to me. But basically, it's a brand of another company, and it's the first time I've driven in that car. I'll tell you, I don't know if just like every car has different options on it. I don't know if I just felt like the Tesla models that are the rental cars are buying as fleet cars are a little bit flimsy feeling. Like it doesn't feel like a solid. It feels more like a golf cart than it does a car. I felt like the Polestar, Volvo. That's the company that owns.
Oh, okay.
I feel like the Polestar felt a little bit more solid. I don't know why. Maybe it's just a little bit more concrete feeling. Rather than, But I got a chance to drive both, and yeah, I mean, my big beef is, I guess the rule with the rental cars is, if you return them back less than 80% charge, just then they charge you like a recharging fee, $35, and you're like, oh well, okay. And
they're gonna get you one way or another, aren't they?
So when you pick up a car that's on the edge, right? So if you pick up a car that's only at 85%, you're going to get dinged, because you're just not going to have enough time to charge this thing to turn it back. So it is what it is. But technology, it's a wonderful thing, I guess. Although I did see a thing online yesterday that the Teslas have a hard time understanding what a horse and buggy is on the road, for those people who live in Amish areas, I guess. Yep. All of that being said, well, I'm glad to hear you're okay. Nobody wrecking their cars.
Me too.
Glad that Tesla's safe, right? Because you obviously made it out in good shape, right? So that's important. Today we're talking about Microsoft Teams Voice, Microsoft Teams Phone, Microsoft Teams calling plans. I mean, I guess depending on whatever marketing you see that day, it could be called something different.
Sure.
And is it worth it? That's the big question.
So I'm glad we're having this discussion because I am a Zoom person. That's just what I started with and I feel comfortable with. But as a technology provider, I feel it's very important that I know both Zoom and Teams. And I don't think people are using Zoom for calling, are they?
I mean, there is something called Zoom Phone, so we can get into
Okay.
that too.
Okay.
And again, keep in mind that when these offerings were created, right, they were really meant to be bolt-on offering. I don't think anyone's going to argue, Scott, that Teams and Zoom, obviously during the pandemic, got very popular, but
Yeah.
they were more video collaboration platforms, not necessarily phone systems, right?
Sure.
That aspect, right? Maybe they don't have contact center features. Maybe they don't have even traditional features on the phone that you've seen in any phone system in the last 30 years. They were meant to be like an easy bolt-on option for people who are like, hey, I can assign a number to my user. They can use the same app that they're using for everything else. It's basic, right? I like to call it a bolt-a-line. Okay. It's like you took a cell phone and you like plugged it into the back of your app, right? And you got a phone number and you got voicemail and all is well, right? So like, that's kind of how it was designed from the get-go. Now, these guys are a little bit behind when it comes to building back the feature set that everybody, has, kind of seen in phone systems traditionally for a long time. But the Teams Phone, Zoom Phone offering, and there's levels. Again, I really think they targeted this for an enterprise play. What does that mean, right? You have hundreds of users and like you can ditch your old premise-based phone system and pay Microsoft to just enable a phone number, and a dial pad attached to the app. And the same for Zoom Phone for that matter, right? Like, hey, like how many users do you have? Oh, I have a couple thousand. Oh, well, we'll give you a price to just turn them all on. Here you go. It's just built into the app, right? So behind Zoom Phone, not Zoom's, like web meeting, right? Zoom meeting, Zoom Phone is actually FreeSwitch, which has been out there for a long time, right? They use the Zoom apps for the soft phone, right?
Okay.
But like the actual brain behind it is technology has been around for a long, long time. On the Microsoft side, Teams Phone is really built on top of what used to be Office Communication Server that then turned into Skype for Business, which then turned into Teams, right? So like that's kind of the back end technology that these people are building on top of, which is, if you've been around for a while, we're largely targeted at larger companies, right? Larger enterprises. So
yeah, I never heard of a communication server.
OCS, Office Communication Server. Yeah, it used to take 5 physical servers that you'd have to like load software on each one.
Okay.
And then they would all do something, right, together as a pod to run what was originally Office Communication Server. And then again, they rebranded it Skype for Business and made it a little bit less beefy, but still like you still had to run 2 or 3 servers at a time together if you were self-hosting this, right? This wasn't designed for, like small, like sub 100 user companies, right? And then when Teams came out, like I know I'm going backwards a little bit, but before Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and this goes back to the mid 2000s, used to be called BPOS, Office Business Productivity Suite. I don't know if you remember that term.
No.
That was the acronym. And then they rebranded it Office 365. So like when the subscription-based model came out, they're like, oh yeah, sure, you could do one user, right? I think zooming forward, right? No
zooming forward.
Zooming forward. So Microsoft Teams as a chat tool and as a web meeting tool, like if you're under a base Microsoft subscription, right? Like business, basic, standard, premium, right? Or like E1, E3, E5, M1, M3, M5, right? You just get Teams, right? But it looks like there's some talk about Microsoft charging, and there are, like they've already started bolting on other features to Teams, like using Teams like Zoom. So you can do big web meetings, 500,000 user, 5,000 user web meetings, stuff like that. So they're already starting to charge a little bit extra for like the premium features, if you would, of Teams. But like the basic Teams that everybody's using today, it's just built into the Office suite. And let me ask you a question, Scott. If Microsoft came to you and said, hey, we changed our mind. Instead of including Teams into your Office subscription, we're going to charge extra for it. Is your customer going to pay more for it? Like, think about that for a second.
In all honesty, probably not, because we don't push and promote Teams as a communicator in our MSP. We just don't. I mean, and maybe that's because I'm not a Teams person myself as the owner of the company.
Yeah.
And
listen, everyone's gonna like go with what they like, right? I mean,
right.
It's a preference thing. But my point is, I think Microsoft's play with Teams as a chat and web meeting tool was, and we're just going to give it to you, right? It's like almost like a Gmail style model. We're going to freemium it out, right? Hey, just take it.
Freemium.
And then maybe later on, we'll start charging for it, right? And like they're hoping that enough people use it and have adopted it that they're like, maybe we'll just pay for it and just keep it rolling because we don't want to change at this point.
Well, I've got a quick question. I'm a Zooms guy. I don't know. Are you a Teams person or are you a Zoom person overall?
I'll actually tell you that in my organization, I have 3 companies, but in my organization, we had originally adopted Slack.
Okay.
Right. As our chat tool. Right. And then because we were doing Microsoft, like everybody else, right? Because emails started with email, kind of morphed out from there. We're like, well, like, I guess we should go this way, right? Because like Slack has a premium or freemium model as well, right? You can use it up to a certain point, and then they really want you to pay, right? Like they start like saying, hey, if you want your history and you want to be able to like, add more people up to a certain point, then you got to pay. And then of course, Slack got acquired by Salesforce. I don't know if you knew that. And so like, there's a story here where those two, have like a future together as a combined company. But all of that being said, the model for Slack still relatively the same. You can use it for free up to a certain point, and then they want you to pay. And so the argument was always, if we're already paying Microsoft, why don't we just use what we're paying for? And then you make the change, right? You make the switch.
Okay.
So like we started off with Slack, we went to Teams for chat and messaging groups, stuff like that.
Yeah.
As a web meeting tool, it works fine, right? I mean, sometimes it's a little slow, but largely works, right? Unless there's an outage. Did you know yesterday Microsoft had a pretty big outage? Like, definitely on the East Coast here in the US. Like Outlook was down, Teams was down a little. Like it wasn't everybody, but like big pockets of users were down. And like, here's the thing: we always think that, oh well, when the big company's down, then oh well, right? There's nothing you can do. When Amazon's down, right? When Google's down, when Microsoft's down,
sure.
Oh well, they're the big guy. Nothing you can do. It's funny when it's not a big name. It's your problem, right? Right. If you plug anything else in that you sell to your customer and it's not a big name, they look at you and they're like, "Why is it down? It's your problem. Go fix it. It's not my." But like that's just it's kind of like, and that's why I tell people when you recommend a solution, Scott, take yourself even out of technology realm for a second. When you recommend a solution and it doesn't go well, when you recommend somebody else, it doesn't go well. When you say, hey, maybe you should try this and it doesn't go well, it's probably going to come back to you. Right. I mean, it's kind of just how it goes. Right. It's like, hey, I really like this new restaurant that opened up. I loved it. Go check it out. They go check it out. They come back. They're like, man, it was horrible customer service. I waited for forever. I don't know why you recommended that place. And you're like, I don't run the joint. I just had a sandwich. I thought it was good that day. Right. So bottom line is, when we talk about redundancy and we talk about, disaster recovery, and we talk about having a backup plan, it's interesting when we try and stack all of our eggs in one basket and that basket starts to have a problem, then we have an issue. So coming back to the concept of, well, if I went with the Microsoft route because it was just included and Microsoft goes down, well, if that's also my phone system and my chat tool and my email system all wrapped together, I'm pretty much out of commission, right? I mean, I guess I could give my customer my cell phone number, but we've talked a long time about not doing that, right?
Right.
because we know that the second that number gets out there, never going to go away, right? You're going to get text, called, and emailed at every hour, every vacation, every holiday. It doesn't matter, right? So I guess the first question is the convenience of the Bolta line of Teams Voice, right? So just to be super clear about like what we're talking about. And by the way, each country, each region has, different, slightly different plans with Microsoft. But, if I share my screen here and just kind of go over the basic kind of North American plans, definitely here in the US, right? There's like standard calling plan. So there's like 3 options here, right? This is on the left-hand side. You have, can you see my screen? Hopefully.
Nope.
Nope. Uh-oh. What's that? Uh-oh. Says I'm sharing, but my computer is definitely not happy. Uh-oh.
I saw it for a split second. Hey, so you said something earlier, and I've been waiting on a chance to ask you this question, and it is very, very relative. So you were talking about Skype, and, George, I remember Skype before the pandemic happened, and it was one of those things that, we had a couple of clients who utilized it. I played around a little bit with it, but are you basically saying that Skype has evolved into what is now Teams? Is that what is that what my interpretation of what I read?
There's still the Skype like non-business option, right? So Skype.com, and like basically you can go and still use Skype and bolt a number on and all that jazz. That hasn't gone away, okay? But I'm talking about the business side of Skype, right? Like, basically like Skype for business is no longer, it's now Teams. It's just like that, right? So like, are there users of Skype for business? There are, right? But it's really coming end of life, and like everybody's everything's being pushed into Office 365, Microsoft 365. It's just like that. Is my screen sharing or no?
Nope, not that I see.
Okay, so let's just go with the fact that this isn't going to work. So all good. No biggie. So let me just do this. 1 second. I'll be right back.
Yep. George, you still with me? Let's give George a minute or two to come back.
All right, now I'm back. Sorry about that.
Good deal.
So I, 2 George Bardizes in here. I guess you can knock out the original one, but I feel like I'm in a better spot. So anyway, so my point is, Skype from a business standpoint is now Teams. Teams is now rolled into the Office 365 suite. You kind of get it for now. I still think they're going to come and charge extra for it at some point, by the way. And like, I think the reason, just for not for nothing, that might happen is there's pesky people over in the EU, right? Are like, hey, it's kind of a monopoly, right? Back to when they pre-install, Internet Explorer, they pre-install Edge, right?
Sure.
Like, hey, Teams is like, it's an anti-competitive thing. They're like, oh, you want us to charge extra for it? Sure, no problem. We could probably do that. And then like, once they do that over there, they're going to do that over here, right?
Sure.
So my point being is that it may not just be included forever. So that's number one, right? Like when Microsoft decides to do things, and like, wasn't that long ago we said the words NCE with like a cringe, and like,
I know.
You started rubbing your teeth together. So there's that. The other part is, so there's 3 options for Microsoft. There's what we call the $8 SKU, which you can then, it's called the Microsoft Phone System Standard. What that means is like you can tie in a third-party provider to sit either in front of Teams or work integrated with Teams Phone to backfill feature set that's missing. All right.
Okay.
That's that, or bring calling plans from outside of Microsoft as well. Right. So that's option A. Option B is a $15 SKU. Right. What that means is that you can add $15 per user. By the way, with NCE, you either they may lock you into that 1 year term when you turn this on, by the way, right? Because that's how they do everything with NCE. Like that's bolting on a 3,000 minute calling plan to each user in a pool. So if you have 10 users, you turn it on for all 10 users, 3 times 10, right? That's going to be your pool of minutes to chew from for the entire company. And then if you're an enterprise customer, right, north of 300 users, it's $57 per user, which is kind of pricey.
Okay.
But again, they'll when you get into that size of account with Microsoft, they tend to negotiate in other ways, right? Because you're already spending a lot of money with Microsoft. So back to, does it make sense? So, a lot of people in SMB land, right, from an MSP standpoint are like, hey, I'm using Microsoft for everything else. I'll just turn on this $15 SKU and then it'll make it the phone system, right? But like the features, and if your customer doesn't need a lot of features, probably might pass, right? Like basic, auto attendant, press 1, press 2, basic, groups, right? Some voicemail. Okay. It's there, in a vanilla way, right? But like the second you have to consider tying into other things that you forget about, right? Like, and maybe everybody's been working remotely for so long, Scott, that they forget about things like, what about the front door phone, the gate? Let's say you have like a gate with a phone built in. Let's say there's an overhead paging speaker. There's other applications that you don't think about. Like Microsoft doesn't necessarily have a good option for those.
Right.
And even if, let's say one day they do, right? You're still paying for each one of those as if they're a monthly recurring cost, like they were just a human being user, right? We see this a lot with the big box VoIP providers, right? Like, hey, the kitchen phone costs the same as the CEO's phone, right? On a monthly basis, right? Or the front doorbell, door phone costs the same as the phone, on the receptionist desk, right? Or whatever, right? So like that subscription-based model kind of doesn't feel good when those things, when I'm not necessarily paying for them now I have to pay for them if I can connect them. So like these things do bubble up. Some other things that Teams Voice is kind of missing is chat, is SMS, right? Like, okay. That's a feature that's kind of bubbled up, right? Texting to and from your business phone number doesn't really exist natively in Teams calling plans, right? And you're like, but I thought Teams is a chat tool, and like, shouldn't it already do that by default? Maybe later on it will, but today it does not do that. You know what else they don't do natively, Scott, out of the box? And maybe this isn't a feature that everybody uses today, but like one-to-one call recording is still really missing from Teams Voice. You can record a meeting, but if I actually call somebody, I'm recording that call is not really there right now.
I gotcha.
And then
it's kind of important to a lot of folks, especially in the business world.
Yeah, I agree. And then one other big part that's really, really messy and like not there without a lot of extra lifting, and even then, like, can you make sense of it, is getting any sort of meaningful reporting out of Teams phone.
Okay.
So like, let's just say it's like, hey, I want to see what's going on. Like, how many calls did I get today? How many calls were missed? How many calls were answered? What is my call flow looking like during hours and after hours? Like, these are kind of basic questions. And like, you can try and take the data out of Teams and move it into Power BI, which is like Teams's dashboard or Microsoft's dashboarding tool. But like, even then, like, it's not super straightforward. And like, oftentimes we hear it's like impossible to make sense of the information that's being put in there. So like, that's a pretty big gap as well, right? And so again, some people are like, hey, my customer doesn't need any of that. They just want the phone to ring. It will ring when there isn't a problem. Right?
That's right.
Like, again, yes, if there's an outage for Microsoft and it's affecting Teams, could even be Teams, like the application, right? You can't sign in. Well, then you're not getting phone calls during that time.
That's right.
Okay. So my argument is, hey, the math may look good, but there's strings attached, and you need to understand what you're walking into, because a lot of people go down this road because they're Microsoft everything else, and then they realize like their customer's just not down with it, and then you got to unwind it. And by the way, remember, like, when you add these calling plans, like, you have a short window to unwind them, or else you're in for a year, right?
So have you had anybody in your experience? Have you seen another IT provider uh, try to make the move into Teams and then come, like you said, unwind it all back?
Yes, we see this often. So
Okay.
like maybe the MSP internally is like, why don't we just adopt Teams as a solution because we don't have very heavy requirements, which I don't know. I guess some MSPs, are like, hey, we just don't answer the phone. I'm like, oh, so you're Frontier Airlines? You just don't take phone calls? Yeah. All right, cool. No, they're like, no, we just don't get many calls. And we're like, okay, like that's cool. I don't know what you're doing differently than everybody else out there, but if you figured out how to make it like 90% not calls and 10% calls, that's awesome. Like
Yeah, you're doing
share with
good.
the I guess share with the rest of us. But like generally speaking, if somebody needs to get a hold of you, they're gonna call you.
That's right.
If they feel it's urgent. Like I know there's some parts of the country where you can text 911, but I would still call them. I don't know about you.
Yep. No,
So,
totally agree.
so that being said, like I put all of that out there so you understand the nuances. Here's a couple of other things, Scott, that's just a little bit not super straightforward. Ready?
Yep.
When you go to distribution and you add Microsoft licenses and then you put them onto your bill somewhere, right? Whether manual or automatic. I mean, obviously a lot of distributors like this automatic, right? Goes into your tool so that you don't have to like spend time manually billing. But let's say even if you're manually billing, right? You put it into the price, right? You probably charge some sales tax if your state requires it.
Sure.
And then you collect it as part of the things that you collect for everything else that your MSP does. But in the US, when you turn on a calling plan from Microsoft, they don't pass through your regular Microsoft discount. I don't know if anybody's ever paid attention to it. So like usually you get some sort of discount percentage on the SKUs that you get through Microsoft or distribution, right?
Okay.
Mine's is 12%, 16%, 19%. I guess depends on who you're working with and how much volume you do, right? But when you activate Teams calling plans, there is 0%.
Okay.
And if you actually dig into it and you find out why, Microsoft has like some cryptic language somewhere in their very, 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 very long T's and C's, which says, hey, calling plans are regulated, right? There is tax concerns. Please consult your tax professional.
Okay.
And it kind of just stopped there, right? So when you resell dial tone in the US, just like sales tax, there's telco taxes. And it's not very super clear, right? There's federal, state, county, municipal, 911, right? There's like, if you ever look at the bottom of your cell phone bill, your VoIP bill, your cable company bill, your landline bill, there's like, I don't know, 10, 15, 18, 20 lines of stuff.
Right.
Each one of those lines goes to a separate agency, separate tax collector, if you will.
Wow.
And like when you rebuild that calling plan, you're effectively the man, the collector of that stuff. So like Microsoft may not be super clear about it, but like it's how it's done. Whoever the biller of the calling plan is to the end customer is viewed as the carrier.
Okay.
So like that's why Microsoft won't discount it. And actually that's why Microsoft says don't mark it up. They hope that you fly underneath the radar. I don't know. But bottom line is you really aren't, when the second you start invoicing for that, there are strings that come along with that. So like I put all of that out there, not to scare anybody, but just to be clear about what it is, right? So putting all of that together, hey, I'm an MSP. I deal with small customers. I just want the phone to ring. I do everything with Microsoft. Why not Microsoft versus, I don't know, anybody else, right? And I can name them all, and so can you, right? Ring Central and Vonage and Nextiva and 8x8, or maybe just the cable company, right?
We like the company bvoip, though.
I don't know. bvoip's out there too. So ultimately, a couple of things happen, right? You start down this road. Maybe you find out your customers not down with it. They want to go back to something a little bit more familiar, traditional. That isn't Microsoft. Now you're, a little bit stuck because maybe you're stuck into that 1 year term that didn't exist before NCA. 2, you spend a lot of time trying to like make it do what the customer wants to do, but like it's not there. And then when you put in your support ticket with Microsoft, what was the last time you put in a support ticket with Microsoft, Scott? Did it go well?
I never have.
Okay. But if you did, maybe it's not the best.
I've heard horror stories.
Right? Okay.
That's probably why I never have.
Yeah. So you go put in a support ticket with Microsoft and you're like, hey, I'm trying to get it to do this. So like, okay, please put that in as a feature request.
Okay.
Our system doesn't do that. And then you find out, you're like, uh-oh. You do some more homework, right? You check the feeds and all the groups. Maybe you go into ITBOG and you're like, has anybody figured this out before? And they're like, oh, yeah, you need to use a third party to do that. So now what started off as something super simple that you thought was just a plug it in, now it's become a little bit clunky because now you got to do all this extra stuff. And like, it's not just a drop down and a bubble button, right? Now you got to run all these PowerShell commands and scripts and all this other stuff. So the reason I go down this road is to paint the full picture, right? Maybe Teams Voice and Teams Calling Plan works for you. Cool. If it doesn't, here are the things that you might stumble into. And because like nobody's really spelled this out ahead of time, right? And by the way, Scott, like you have as an MSP, probably dozens of things that you have to deal with on a regular, right?
That's right.
Vendor and a ticketing system and a billing solution and a firewall entity and OneDrive, Dropbox, Zoom, right? By the time you add all these vendors up, there's a lot of it adds up, right? Dozens of vendors. I don't know any MSPs that's just selling Microsoft, and not doing anything else on the regular, unless that's all they do, right? Which I guess some people out there do, but most don't. So big picture, I guess the theme is it worth it? Well, you need to understand what you're walking into, just like anything else. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have time to do the homework.
Gotcha.
So here, bvoip, by the way, we only work with MSPs. We don't like to lock people into anything other than a month to month. I know that that's starting to become unusual now in these current times. Okay. But if you want to turn on Teams direct routing, which requires that $8 SKU, which you do get the Microsoft discount applied to it, by the way, then effectively you're just turning on the soft phone in Teams. And then all of the other functionality that, call routing and auto attendance and call queues and agents and hold music and voicemail and all that other stuff is really happening in front of Teams. You're just using Teams as another app, another soft phone, and so the cool part about that is if Microsoft is having a problem like they did yesterday, hey, there's still a working phone system in front of Microsoft that is still running if Microsoft's having an issue, right? It's a little bit of a DR strategy, right? Things happen. And then two, a lot of the features that Teams just doesn't have and may not have for a really long time, like all of a sudden are in front of you, right? Like you have the ability to go back to your customer and say, hey, I got it. Yes, I can turn that feature on for you. Oh, and by the way, if you already have an investment in phones, right? Like not proprietary phones, right? And Avaya phones only ever going to work with an Avaya system, right? Or Mitel phones are only going to work with a Mitel system. But like you have open standard phones, like Yealink's pretty popular, Polycom, right? Stuff like that. Okay. You can still use those devices, right? If you want devices, I know, there's definitely a debate of, hey, does the desk phone exist in 5 years? I don't know. I still think so. Depends on your preference, right? Oh, and then by the way, let's say some people just don't like Teams as a soft phone, right? Maybe they're like, hey, I'm okay with Teams as a chatting tool. I may even do a web meeting from time to time, but like, I'm just not happy with it as a phone app. Well, the people who don't want to use Teams as a phone app can use other options and still talk to people that do within the organization. Okay. So like the option is choice, right? Like it's a lot of this comes down to preference. Okay. Does it meet the requirements, but does your customer actually like it? Okay.
That means a lot. Customers got to like it.
100%. If they don't like it. Like you like Tesla, right? You said, hey, my car got wrecked. I'm going to buy another one. You like the car, right? Or else you go buy something else. So absolutely. It's a preference thing. The call recording gap fixed. The call reporting gap fixed. The features like contact center and like maybe even some of the basic phone system features everybody expects are there. And by the way, we also get pretty interesting when it comes to things like integration. All right. So like as an MSP, a lot of people like it when they find out that the app works with the tool that they use on the regular, right?
Sure.
Now we can bring that capability into the equation, right? Where probably doesn't exist outside of that. So when you kind of rubber band all of that together, it makes it a little bit more viable, in my opinion, right? As an MSP, to not worry about, you know, going to your end customer and finding out after the fact that it doesn't fit, right? Because something's missing or they don't like it or it's too limited. But it also gives you a situation where you're not relying on Microsoft 100% of the time.
Okay.
And I think at this point, right, it's something to consider, right? Because like, how many times do you say, well, it's Microsoft, there's nothing we can do?
Not very often.
But I'm just saying, like, your customers got at that point going to say, well, we didn't have this problem before. Maybe putting all of our eggs in Microsoft land wasn't the right play, right? But it's funny when I start seeing in all the threads, how do you communicate with your customer when there's a mass outage? If the system that they use for email is down, how do I notify them, right, that there's a problem? And some people are like, hey, I had my RMM has a little thing that pops up in the right-hand corner of the computer, like a toast, right? Or, hey, I use something like a portal, right? That my customer, you know, like Envarosoft or a Desk Director or what's the other more popular one? Cloud Radial or like one of those, right? Where there's some sort of like broadcast messaging built in. Some people are like, hey, you know, I keep the cell phone numbers of all my customers and I can just do a blast text message. There's a couple, you know, companies out there that do that. My recommendation is, hey, you know, like all of these software companies that you deal with usually have a status page. Maybe you should adopt the status page for your MSP.
That's a great idea.
All right. And then, by the way, most of the status pages let you do a Slack notification, a Teams notification, text message, an email, whatever, right? You can hook all these different channels into it, right? But my point being is, you obviously want to make sure that you plan ahead so that you don't find yourself in this situation with no plan, right? And you're just kind of, you know, your customer's shaking a little bit. They start getting a little loud. Maybe they do have your cell phone number. And then all of a sudden, like, it's a bad day, right? So that's the topic, right? Is it worth it? I guess the question is to you. You know, you need to weigh the goods and the bads, but like, don't just go down Microsoft lane without understanding all of these pieces, because when you do, by the time you figure it out, you may be locked in and you may not be able to change, or maybe you creates a little bit of a issue with your customer where you're like, yeah, I'm not going to wait a year to get off of this, right? Like, well, I need to go somewhere else. So it just comes back down to, you need to evaluate your solutions, right? Right. And you need to make sure that you have the requirements figured out up front so that you don't end up in a bad place. But for the people that are using Teams Phone and love it, cool. Make sure that you're not rebilling for calling plans. And then you don't understand the legal taxation part of it because it's there. And don't be surprised if somewhere down the line, I'm not talking about years, could be this year, could be next year, that Microsoft comes back and says, hey, the base Teams subscription, the actual thing that you use before you even turned on the phone part, is now going to be something that isn't free.
Yep.
So now all of a sudden the customer's like, well, do I have a choice? They're going to be like, no. You're going to either have to move to something else, or you're going to pay the bill, right? So I think that may come. And it's already being talked about. So we'll see. So
I'm sure it will come.
Probably. That's a guess. But ultimately, on the Zoom phone side, right? Similar. I mean, it's a little bit different of a story because Zoom does have more than a couple of plans, right? But you also need to have the same conversation about Zoom phone as you do about Teams phone. I know that wasn't necessarily part of the topic, but with Zoom phone, again, great web meeting and web streaming and like love it for, the web, the meeting part of it. But again, as a bolt-a-phone or a bolt-a-line onto the Teams app, it's just okay, right? It's going to be in the same boat as Teams Voice. If you want to go into a full-blown contact center solution, Teams does have this enterprise thing that they've rolled out earlier this year. Go and, number one, do the math. Number two, understand, do I want to put all of my eggs in one basket? That's all. It's just a homework conversation. But the homework has to be done, or else you're going to find out after the fact if it's a good situation or not.
Gotcha. And after the fact is not a good time to learn if it's good or not. You need to know before you go in.
Let's be honest, Scott. We've both been around for a while. A lot of times what happens in MSP land is your customer comes to you and says, hey, I'm looking for this. What do you got for me? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, let me get back to you. And you're scrambling, right, to find something.
Trying to find a solution.
And when you're doing something on the quick, maybe you don't get all of the pieces up front, right?
No, that's fair.
I love the forums. I love ITBOG, right? And like people will give you like shortcuts. But at the end of the day, you get the full picture in one shot? Probably not.
Yep.
And so and then what happens is you learn while you're deploying it for your customer. And I appreciate learning on the job. We've all done it. But if the other big thing that's worth zooming out on, Scott, and I mean, I'm not telling anybody something new here. I thought the whole idea around managed services and profitability is to not have multiple vendors in the same category.
That's right.
What about that whole word of like standardization?
Yep.
So I was just having a call with an MSP yesterday evening, and he's like, wow, management thinks that we shouldn't be in the telephony business. We're an MSP. And so they're just using a master agent. I'm like, okay. I was like, so every time your account managers get their, the raised hand from the end customer saying, I need something, that boomerangs back to this master agent. There's a lot of good ones, even some that sponsor ITBOG, right? Here's the problem with master agency, unless you have this conversation with them up front. It's kind of flavor of the week, right? Who's having the deal, the promo, the special? That's what they're pitching that day because that's where they get the most back on the deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, they're like, oh, well, that's cool because they're not going to call us for support, Scott. Like they're going to call RingCentral directly. They're going to call Nextiva directly. They're going to call Vonage directly. They're going to call Zoom phone directly, Teams phone directly. And I'm like, that's not true. What do you mean? That's what they said. That's why we went this way. We didn't have to spend any time. And I'm like, oh, okay. Back to the whole, hey, that new restaurant was really good. You should go check it out. If something goes bad, trust me, they come back to you. And by the way, when they come back to you in IT land, they expect you to do something about it.
That's right.
And the second you start spending
they
time
expect you to fix it.
Yeah. The second you start spending time on that, they just expect that that's part of what you're selling, your services, right? Your help desk and IT services. And by the way, are you charging extra for that when they come back and ask you for that help?
Probably not.
Okay. So now you've lost control. You're still supporting it.
Your customer is not happy with it.
Customers expecting you to do the work because it's not doing what they expected it to do. Their interaction with the big company maybe didn't go well. That's how you got sucked back into it. The cost of your time is not covered by whatever you're getting back in commission at that point, right? Because it's so little, like your labor cost is going to blow it out of the water. And now there's literally different solution in practically every customer now because it's flavor of the week. And that I've seen that picture happen so many times that it goes against the entire idea of the IT services or managed services business. No different in Teams and Zoom phone land, right? Like if one customer has that and another customer has something else, another customer has something else, another customer has something else, how do your frontline people, maybe that's you, how do you keep up with all that? You
Very
end up
difficult.
calling the support line of the vendor and sitting on hold and asking questions to even figure out what the hell is going on.
True. Because it's
So,
hard to support all that many products. That's why we all talk about standardization.
so I think this is where it's a little bit of a fairy tale story. It really is. And by the way, I've seen it at really small MSP size. I've seen it at medium MSP size. I've seen it at large MSP size. The master agency thing sounds great. But if you're keeping everything on the same vendor, it's okay, I guess. It's better. But if it's every vendor is different because, there was a different special that day, it's got a balloon on you. It's got a balloon on you. So
just a matter of time.
Yeah. So my point is, just like anything else, right? Sounds easy, sounds simple, should make sense. Understand that it's, looks inexpensive. And then you get into it and you find out that your time has a cost. Mm-hmm. Your end customer's happiness counts. Right. And if you're stuck into a term, which practically everybody does these days, but not bvoip, just going to mention that. Practically everybody does these days. If you get stuck into something, if Scott went into that Tesla and found out that it wasn't for him, it's not easy to get out of it.
Nope.
That's it. That's my story of the day, right? So, just wanted to paint those pictures. Is it worth it? In my opinion, it could be. But if it isn't, if you run into a problem, it might not be easy to get out of that.
Yep.
So the theme of the day is do your homework, make sure you actually know what you're selling. And number two, outages are going to happen and continue to happen. I don't care what size you are. Probably
or who the provider is.
Probably need to make sure that you have a plan to communicate with your customers in the event of that inevitability, right? Yeah. So for $89 a month, Scott, I think a status page might not be the worst investment. Just a thought.
Yeah. And it would be easy to update if you integrated certain channels into it. So awesome. Great advice.
Might not be a bad idea. And by the way, lastly, I know every MSP on the planet's like, hey, I like to drink my own Kool-Aid before I go and offer to my customer. By the way, totally acceptable. And I said the same thing and all good. Remember that your requirements might not be the same as your end customer.
Yep. What works for you may not work for them.
100%. So make sure that you get that going into it. And the other thing I always tell MSPs, and this is my last thought here, but if you have the one guy or girl or person that is the guru of the solution, and the rest of the people that you may have in your organization are I don't know, I'm just going to send it to this one person, you've created a bottleneck, right?
Yep.
You need to make sure that whatever solution you put out there, your chain's only as good as the weakest link, right? So if you're, most inexperienced person at the bottom of the totem pole can't do basic stuff. What's basic stuff, Scott? Could be, password resets, changing a name on something, right? Let's say somebody got married or their last divorce, right? Their last name changed, or maybe a button on the phone needs to be adjusted to something else, or maybe somebody's voicemail greeting needs to be recorded and it wasn't, right? We're talking about basic stuff, right?
Basic
if
needs.
That lowest person on the food chain can't do that stuff, right? If they don't have enough access to do it, or they have to learn how to do scripting, or if it's not very straightforward, then I think you could be potentially creating a traffic jam.
It's going to bubble up.
And by the way, your customer doesn't want to wait a day until that person's available. I'm just going to be honest.
Yep.
So anyway.
We live in a microwave society, don't we? Everybody wants it now.
One thing that I've always noticed, Scott, is that when you're talking about ripping and replacing an RMM solution, or ripping and replacing an antivirus or MDR solution, or ripping and replacing a backup solution, or something that's expected to be there, but largely to the customer, they don't interact with that stuff on a regular, right? They just expect that whatever you're doing is being done correctly.
Right.
Well, until there's a problem, but we won't go there. When it's something they have to touch every day, that's where they get a little bit ornery, right? If they have to do it on a day-to-day, whether it's a communications platform, phone system, chat tool, Zoom, QuickBooks, remote access tool, whatever it is, when that thing isn't doing what they expect it to be doing, that's where they want timely response.
Understandably, too.
So like
that's what they're paying us for.
Yeah, you get a little bit of luxury on the back end when they don't see it. If they don't see, they don't know, right? So like they just expect that you're doing the job, and like you can make those moves without them even seeing it. But it's a little bit harder to do that when they're interacting with whatever the solution is, right? So
it's true.
When Microsoft's down, we keep on saying that because it was so recent yesterday in this case, they see it. They can't access their email. They can't access their chat tool. They can't access their documents in OneDrive, whatever it may be. They're stuck, right? They're kind of like sitting, like, and that's where they get a little bit more, hey, they call in because they actually want to talk to somebody because they actually can't do their work. That's where you get the 911 thing, right?
Yep, they're stuck.
That's why I keep on knocking on Frontier Airlines. It's like, okay, I booked the flight got canceled. Now I got to talk to a chatbot. Like, I want to talk to somebody.
Yep.
Actually, I prefer to do it in person. Can I go to a customer service counter in the airport? No, I got to go to the chatbot. Okay. And like, not exactly the best feeling in that situation.
Nope.
So that's the story. I hope your new Tesla works out well, man.
I do too. I'm pretty familiar with it already. It's the same thing I already had, but I absolutely love the car. Nope. Going with a different color. Going with the pearl white exterior, but the white and black tuxedo interior. I love the white seats.
Nice. Are you sure if you drop something on them, they're staying a little bit?
I mean, hey, I had the car, like I said, 45,000 miles, 2 years, and I didn't put any protectant on it or anything. I've spilled several things on it. It just wipes up. I don't know. I never had any issues with it. I was a little concerned when I first got the car. I was really concerned about, anything happening to the white interior, but no, it's pretty durable, honestly.
That's good. I was in Prague a few weeks back for
okay. Yeah, I saw the pictures.
And I was like going back in time a little bit. I did not see a single electric car. And by the way, I know I've said this in a couple places, but there's 1.3 million residents of Prague, so a little smaller than Philadelphia. 1 million registered vehicles. I don't know where they put them, but that's what they told me. 1 million registered vehicles for 1.3 million residents. So I assume kids aren't driving, but
wow.
I did not. I mean, in the airport, they were marketing them electric cars, but like, did I see one on the street? No.
Nope.
All diesel or gas. And man, I never went to so many places that was cash in a while. Everyone's like, do you have cash? I'm like, oh, I guess I should bring some cash. So it kind of felt cool, right? You went a little bit back in time, and I'm like, this wasn't so bad. But yeah, apparently somebody saw at one hotel there was one electric charging station. I didn't even see it, but I'll take their word for it. But I did not see a single electric car on the road. So
that technology has not been widely adopted there.
No, all diesel, all gas. And I was like, oh, it's nothing bad with that. You just they keep running forever.
Yeah. Well, here in the States, it's widely adopted. I think, 2 years ago when I purchased mine, I was one of the very few in my area locally where I live to have one. And it used to be every time I drive it to go to get something to eat or whatever, go to the drive-through, the lady at the window would say, "Oh, is that a Tesla?" I mean, like, it was a huge deal. And now it's not a big deal at all. I don't think the past 6 months of owning my other Tesla, anyone ever said anything about a Tesla to me, because they're just so commonplace now. I mean, they're very common. So yeah, it's happening here.
I know for sure it's happening. And all the car manufacturers are basically like, oh yeah, by 20, whatever, we're just gonna be all electric. But I don't know. I kind of feel like something to be said for gas cars. I mean, by the way, even with all this electric cars being sold, it's still like single digit percentages versus the cars on the road, right? Like it's gonna take a really long time for this conversion to occur. But yeah, I just like the fact that it's like, hey, listen, runs on its own power, man. I don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about it. The station's not going out of business anytime soon.
One thing I've always wondered too, though, George, why don't they put solar on top of the car and at least allow it to charge itself a little bit while you're driving? I don't know. I hadn't figured that part out yet, but I don't know.
Good question.
Yeah,
it's a good question.
Put some solar panels on the top. They're glass.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that would be. I gotta assume that the cost versus the reward isn't there. Is probably my guess.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see if they ever get to and I think somewhere on the West Coast they're doing it, right? Where they drop your battery and they put in one that's fully charged, right?
Yeah, I saw that technology. I don't know if they're doing it here in the States, but
I thought I saw somebody said they might be doing it in like as a test bed somewhere in
maybe so, but I heard about that in China. I think they're doing that in Asia, where they really like you literally go into a station. It's not a filling station. It's not a gas station, but you go into a station and then you put your car on a lift and they pop out your battery, almost eject it, so to speak, and put a fully charged one in, and you're out faster than you can pump gas at a gas station.
I think that like when it gets to that point, when that's more the experience, I think that'll change the game. But like imagine driving down a highway turnpike, like here in Pennsylvania, right? I got the PA turnpike, got the New Jersey turnpike, right? Like a lot of highways, a lot of lanes. And it's like, if I got to stop off and get gas, I don't want to wait really long. And like you're talking about people in these charging, waiting an hour, in line just to get to the point where they can plug it in. And then you got to wait for it to,
Well, now I will tell you, I have never experienced that in my 2 years of owning a Tesla. My biggest thing, honestly, I have had to wait, 30 minutes at a charging station, but typically I don't do a lot of travel. So the car is always plugged in when it's in my garage. So anytime I want to get in the car and go, I've always got about 300 miles of travel. And just to, go to get something to eat or, go to the store across town. I mean, it's all I've ever needed. But, I certainly have seen those videos in like on the West Coast or, in heavily populated areas where you might have a line and of 50 cars waiting for 6 slots to charge. So, no, that has definitely been a nightmare for some folks.
I'll give you one on the way out of the session. So
yeah,
Pepsi just received and started putting on the Tesla tractor trailer version. And they were saying that they expected about 300 to 500 miles, of travel on a charge. And like on a fully loaded trailer with Pepsi products, getting about 100 miles. So I don't know if.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense. So the more you load the vehicle down with weight, the trailer of the Tesla, it was a fully loaded trailer full of Pepsi is going to weigh a whole lot more. But that would consume more battery.
That was a little fact that probably needed to be explained to somebody before they bought all these things. But hey, I digress. It's back to the whole got to do your homework, right?
Yeah.
There it is.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see how both teams and the world of electric cars progresses in the future too. So definitely. But
100%.
Well, George, let me ask you one final question. If we've got a member who is watching us and they've heard already about bvoip and they just hadn't made the jump yet, what's the best way they can get started or get in touch with you and your team?
Well, they could do what you love to do, Scott, which is like just send me a message on Facebook since they love ITBOG, right? So definitely I'm totally out on all the platforms, right? And by the way, I think I am the only George Bardisi. So it's a very unique last name. But you can, hit me up on all the channels. Or, by the way, you can hit bvoip.com. You can call us. I don't know if you still do that. Do people still call each other? 215-402-7200 and just hit option 2 for sales. Or email me, gbardisi@bvoip.com as well. But like, by the way, we're not hiding from anyone. We're super accessible, right? We like to be available as much as possible.
And if you are going to reach out to George and his team, be sure you let them know that you saw this live stream, and that's what prompted the call. So just let them know that you catched us on ITBOG. So awesome. Yeah. Well, hey, George, I really appreciate your time today, and we'll have to do this again next time.
Love catching up with you, Scott. Talk to you soon.
Awesome. Have a great day.
All right.
See ya. Bye-bye.